Welcome to the target stream for Mint Press News. I am your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us. Since our last show, Israel has continued to escalate in Lebanon by violating the ceasefire, which has been met with operations by Hezbollah in retaliation. This as the Yemen front is properly heating up now, with the first clashes seen between Ansarullah and the Saudi-backed opposition since 2022. And the corporate media is crashing out over the funeral held for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Iran. But before we begin, the target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. You can join Mint Press on Patreon or right here on YouTube and join our membership program. Just so everyone is aware, we are doing these live streams on Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. CST. We missed last Thursday, but going forward every Monday and Thursday, we will be doing these streams. So now to begin, the corporate media is having a terrible time currently because they are being forced to cover what is being called the largest funeral in modern history in Iran, while also trying to spin the narrative that the majority of Iran's people are vehemently opposed to their government and, of course, hated the man that they're all attending the funeral for. So, just so everyone is aware, there are millions of people that have packed the streets of Tehran, the capital city of Iran. And then now millions more are showing up in Qom as Ayatollah Khamenei's body is being transported or has been transported there. It will be finally transported to a city called Mashhad, and it will be flown in as well to Iraq, where there are preparations for mass gatherings there of mourners too. And as I said at the start, the corporate media is completely crashing out. So we're going to take a look at some of these videos first before we look at what they've been saying and claiming and trying to do in terms of putting a spin on this. So let's take a look at what was happening in Tehran. Here, this is helicopter footage from Tehran. As you can see, the claims that millions of people showed up are very much supported by the footage that you're seeing here on the screen. And indeed, Al Jazeera reported that somewhere in the range of 13 to 15 million people are said to have showed up. On top of that as well, the Financial Times admitted this too. So that's something to keep in mind. But others have not exactly been as charitable. We're going to take a look at that. So that's some of the footage. We'll explore more of it as well. But the corporate media's reaction to this has been quite interesting. So just to pull this up here. So the BBC says what you've just seen on your screen there is thousands on the streets of Iran. CNN, they claimed that it was hundreds of thousands of people that gathered. And also then you'll see here the news headline by the NBC News that ran their headline claiming that Iranian regime shows its power as defiant Tehran turns out for Khamenei's funeral. So they're trying to, put a spin on it, but not succeeding. And then if you go down further, there are claims, the New York Times says hundreds of thousands. Al Jazeera obviously is saying millions, and they came out with their own figures. They are there on the ground. And if you go down, the cope is quite insane because NBC at one point was reporting tens of thousands. Now, as somebody that has covered a lot of demonstrations myself, this clearly is not tens of thousands of people. And like I said, the Financial Times themselves did admit that it was millions of people on the streets. And you can see that. There's a lot of footage that has come out. We hear these chants of death to America from the crowd, who really, and this is an important element to what you're seeing here on screen, are demonstrating a certain resolve that indicates this is a demand more for revenge than simply mourning. That's what we're seeing from people. People are calling for revenge. We're seeing them chant very angrily at the United States for having killed Khamenei. Here they're throwing stones at an image of Donald Trump, and this was entitled "Stoning Satan." I believe that's how it was framed. So there has been a massive turnout, and this turnout is within the range of around 12 to 15 million people, we're told. The population of Tehran, the city, is not even that big, which means that the entire city's population, plus those from outside the city limits, have flooded in order to mourn Khamenei. And the reason why this is such a big issue for the corporate media to deal with, and why they're throwing out all thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and they won't accept what we're all seeing and what the footage suggests, is because they built this narrative for decades that the Iranian people despise their government to such an extent that they want to overthrow it violently. They will invite a regime change war. They will invite the United States and Israel striking their country and killing their leadership. And that's exactly the opposite of what we're seeing here. The footage that is coming out is demonstrating that instead, the people of Iran are creating the largest funeral gathering in modern recorded history. So that's a big statement. And that is a big slap to the US, a big slap to its narrative. And even Donald Trump himself admitted that it was somewhat of a shock. And now we see the rhetoric of the Trump administration. Just so everyone can see, this is Qom. This is before the actual event started for the funeral, because of course it's a multi-city funeral that has taken place. And these are the crowds that already showed up in Qom without the event even starting. So you're seeing these mass gatherings, you're seeing mourners pour into the streets, and there's no way to hide this. At the end of the day, they can try and claim whatever they want, but there's a reason these people have come out en masse, and there's enough videos of them crying and mourning. This is something that, again, is undeniable and is a slap to the United States and their narrative, as well as the Israelis and their narrative about Iran altogether. And this is something that I think is very important to take note of, because they are trying to downplay this as much as possible, but they're just not successful. They're not being successful. Meanwhile, Trump was asked about Iran, and this was what he had to say.
We're doing very well with Iran. We wiped out their Navy, their Air Force, their radar, their leaders. We wiped out everybody. And then I heard they're doing very well. No, they're not doing well at all. They want to make a deal so badly. But we'll see what happens. They have to make the right deal, because they cannot have a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. You want to see a bad stock market? Let them use a nuclear weapon. I'll show you a bad stock market, right? So, but we're doing very well. They've agreed to a lot of things that a lot of people said they wouldn't agree to. We'll see what happens. We're going to win one way or the other. We'll win the nice way or the not nice way. But I want to welcome.
So again, making threats, and he's talking about a deal. Again, the current status of the memorandum of understanding is that the United States has repeatedly violated it. Trump himself has threatened to take out the entire negotiating team, which is interesting because the corporate media came out with a report that they leaked claiming that Israel had a plot to take out the entire negotiating team to actually implement Trump's threat. So it really begs the question, was there a connection there between what Donald Trump was threatening and the alleged Israeli plot? Now, Israel, of course, has denied that it was planning to kill the entire Iranian negotiated team. But it is interesting that everyone's just sort of brushed it off that Donald Trump made that threat first. Then the Trump administration, of course, bombed southern Iran. Iran responded. And it does appear at this point as if what we are seeing now is a phase where the funeral is going to end. And then after that, I believe we'll see Iran respond more so to these violations and start to actually address what's happening in Lebanon as well, which we will get to in a little bit. But before we do, a very interesting development has come, and that is that Yemen's Ansar Allah, I know I said in the streams previously that they were mobilizing and that they could attempt to retake the port city of Aden. We have now seen that Ansar Allah has launched. Now, the Jerusalem Post here says this is a major offensive. I would call it more of a series of probing attacks. Now, they're focusing a lot on an offensive which took place near Hodeidah, which is a port city controlled by Yemen's Ansar Allah. That's the main focus. There's been 2 attempts so far to take that area. I'm just going to pull it up on screen here. So that's a map that was put together demonstrating roughly the area that Ansar Allah entered. They briefly took over this point, which is called Jabal Dabas, which is a strategic point on the way to obviously Aden, which is their ultimate objective. But they did 2 offensives, and we heard from sources on the ground and the admissions of those in the Saudi-backed coalition's opposition groups that Ansar Allah, or what are referred to in the Western media, unfortunately in all English-speaking media, wrongfully so as the Houthis, that they killed 16 Yemeni government troops in fiercest clashes in years. And then they say a Yemeni minister says more than 50 Houthi fighters were killed in the Hodeidah clashes. For this, there is no evidence whatsoever that that is the case. I'm not saying that they didn't lose men, but we would expect to see some footage if that was the case. It appears that the offensive or the 2 pushes that were made by Ansar Allah were not heavily relying on fighters like on the ground storming positions. More so, this was using drones and fighting from a distance. And it appears that what they're doing is probing for a larger offensive as mobilizations continue across the country. And they could end up mobilizing around 350,000, maybe 400,000 men, while the opposition side also mobilizes. Now, when we hear Yemeni government troops, just so everyone is aware, I've gone through this on previous live streams, but when you are hearing Yemeni government troops, this government that they're talking about is technically at the United Nations, the internationally recognized government, but really what they are a group of Saudi-backed Yemenis who were put together in a group in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. There is actually no longer any real president. You know, there's someone they've elected as technically president, but there's no actual formal election process. It's like an interim president. So they have this body, this governing body that was put together in Saudi Arabia, which tells you everything you need to know, because Saudi Arabia is the other party and they're fighting a local Yemeni force. And Ansarullah, or the Houthis, as they're referred to, because they're made to be these ragtag rebel group, they're basically just tribal fighters. Look at them with their swords and look at them with their daggers and look at how primitive they are. This is the way they're presented, and this is why I have such a problem with them. The Houthi rebels, they call them, and versus the government troops. The government troops are what? A bunch of militiamen and ex-army people who defected from the army when Sana'a was taken over in 2015. 2/3 of the army, the armed forces, remained and took the side of the Ansarullah government, which currently rules the capital city of Yemen. And they're a government. They're a functioning government there. Now, you want to make arguments about are they democratic and all of that. That's another question. But for all intents and purposes, they are the real government. And for the longest time, it was the Saudi-backed, internationally recognized government forces and the United Arab Emirates' Sovereign Transitional Council that were fighting for control of Aden. And they actually had a shared government. I'll pull up on screen here, actually, so we can demonstrate this a little bit better. So it's easy to sort of visualize this here, because Yemen, unfortunately, doesn't get much coverage in the corporate media. And so as a result, most people, unfortunately, don't really know the topography. They don't know what Yemen even really looks like. So this is Sana'a here. This is Hodeidah. There's a position south of Hodeidah where Ansarullah are trying to push down south. And this is Aden here. So the vast majority of the Yemeni population lives within this territory here. Most of them are under control of Ansarullah. Aden here, which is the port city, the strategically important port city, that is where the Saudi-backed forces are currently positioned. And they have like this, I suppose, governing body that is there. But the reality is that they were really formed in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. That's where the internationally recognized government of Yemen was formed, in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, literally a hotel government, right? So, which I'm sure, Donald Trump is very impressed at, forming a government inside a luxury hotel. That would be great for him. But at the current moment, Ansarullah's forces appear to be probing. They're building up forces. Aden was previously controlled between the Saudi-backed forces and the UAE-backed forces. But the UAE, a few months back, got a little bit too greedy, and they started over here in the east of the country. They started trying to take over large swaths of territory from the Saudi-backed forces and ended up getting crushed and pushed out. And they're a non-player at this point. They were pushed out of control. Now, we were told, and the reason I pull this up and the reason I'm talking about the Yemeni government forces, as they're called, right, in the way that I am, is because we were told that the Sovereign Transitional Council was a organic Yemeni movement, which was, it wanted to govern Aden or South Yemen. That's where it wanted to govern. And it was, vying for power. It made a pact with the Saudi-backed government to form a unity opposition government to Ansarullah in Aden, right? And it was granted that sort of recognition, and, international actors would talk to it or affiliate with it. It wasn't isolated in the way that Ansarullah is, yet it literally took 2 seconds for Saudi Arabia to put some pressure on the United Arab Emirates, and now the STC doesn't really exist. And by the way, the STC had within it its core fighters, its most powerful fighters, as part of the Southern Giants Brigades, were Al-Qaeda Salafi extremists. They were its core fighters, and still now of the Saudi-backed opposition, the strongest fighters are renowned for being Salafis, for being Al-Qaeda affiliated or formerly Al-Qaeda fighters and ISIS fighters. This is well known about this. But again, that's not going to be communicated to you because Ansarullah cannot be treated as a legitimate government, because whether you love them or you hate them, they actually are organic, they are Yemeni, and they represent a large portion of the Yemeni population. And of course, Saudi Arabia doesn't want that. It's against its interests. But, obviously, the United States doesn't want that. It was the Obama administration that greenlit the Saudi coalition's offensive against Yemen, which ended up resulting in around 400,000 people being killed, the vast majority of whom died because of the Saudi blockade, which was aided by the United States. The UAE, of course, was a main actor in this. A lot of the other Gulf and Arab states in the region contributed, but the British and the Americans and the Israelis were involved in logistics. They were involved in training forces to go and fight inside of Yemen. All of this, a very, very dirty history. But again, the internationally recognized government is the Ritz-Carlton Hotel government, and it's formed in Saudi Arabia. And now we're supposed to treat these people like they're more legitimate than a government which controls the largest portion of the Yemeni population, actually does have a government, operates out of the capital city of the country in question, and has the majority of the armed forces of that country on its side. Just for a little bit of context here, when we see the way that things are framed. Now, the conflict here sort of froze, and now we're seeing, again, that there is a push to capture new areas by Ansarullah. It looks like briefly they took positions in this offensive, which I believe is more probing than anything at this point, because they still are mobilizing their men. We have a lot of evidence of that. The reason why this conflict really froze at the end of the day, there was this big battle in a place called Ma'rib. And in the east of the country in general, it's a lot tougher fighting, and a lot of people, tens of thousands of people, died in the battles that were happening there, and neither side could really budge the other. But the Yemeni, the Ansarullah forces wanted to take over territory in the east of the country to get access to their natural resources, which are being held hostage by the Saudi-backed forces. Of course, Saudi Arabia doesn't want Yemen to exploit its natural resources. This is the entire reason why Yemen went into revolt, right? Well, not the entire reason, but a large chunk of the reason why Yemen underwent a revolution, why they removed one of their presidents, and then again, Ansarullah, or the Houthi rebels, they removed the next government or the next president that came in and took over. This whole conflict is because of foreign interference inside of Yemen, all of it. And it froze in 2022 because this happened. So this is the United Arab Emirates. And in 2022, Ansarullah revealed that they had acquired drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles that were capable of targeting the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, hitting military bases and key infrastructure, bypassing their air defenses in order to do so. And those attacks that they launched caused the United Nations to come in and negotiate a temporary ceasefire, which ended up holding for a very long time. At this point, reopening this conflict, the UAE have, in essence, been pushed out of the picture. They don't have any big sway inside of Yemen anymore, as they once did. They attempted to take it over from Saudi Arabia. Now the Saudis have to make the decision to fight Ansarullah, which is mobilizing its men. And in my opinion, this would be a great time for them to do this, to try and take Aden and unite the country. They right now, like their objective, their stated objective is that they want to take measures in order to end the blockade on the country, which is killing thousands of people in Yemen every year. Again, we don't hear anything about this because the corporate media just refuses to report on it. So nothing that is happening inside of Yemen, they don't want to tell you about it. They don't want to talk about it. For them, Yemen is a country that simply does not exist, and they will not inform you about anything that is going on there. The real question here is, will Saudi Arabia fight to keep its foothold inside of Yemen, or will it give up? Because Saudi Arabia currently, the Strait of Hormuz, for all intents and purposes here, is closed. There's not much traffic that is currently ongoing for the Strait of Hormuz. It's at a it's at the bare minimum. Now, some have attempted to say, well, we're going to, put pipelines down south in order to circumvent having to use the Strait of Hormuz. All of this is nonsense. However, Saudi Arabia has pipelines, and they come out to the Red Sea, and from the Red Sea, they're able to sell oil and gas. They're able to trade. If Saudi Arabia decides to double down on its blockade of Yemen and double down on its backing of the opposition forces to Ansar Allah, then what they could do very easily is Ansar Allah could simply just shut down Bab al-Mandab here, the strait here, and the entire Red Sea region, which it's demonstrated that it can do in the past in order to impose a blockade on ships affiliated with Israel and Israeli goods and trading to the ports here in Eilat, right? So they've successfully bankrupted Eilat port because of the blockade that they imposed. They could do the same now. They could blockade the Red Sea and prevent Saudi Arabia from doing any trade. Now, this doesn't just have implications on Saudi Arabia alone. This also has knock-on implications on the global economy, because as we've covered before, if now Bab al-Mandab is closed, then the Suez Canal is closed. And at the same time, if the Strait of Hormuz, even if there is some minimal traffic through the Strait of Hormuz here, it's not really anything significant. It's largely closed. Then what you're going to have to do is you are going to have to send all of your tankers all the way around Africa, around the entire continent here, to get them to Europe, which will prove an absolute catastrophe. So this will mean that we're going to be hit globally with inflation. We're going to face an economic crisis, and they can turn this screw anytime they like. Now, many people have been asking about Iran itself and its responses to what the United States is doing, its military buildup, all of the rest of it. This is one card that they have to play that they have not yet fully played. Now, they have threatened to play it. And Ansar Allah has even implemented its pledge to back up Hezbollah inside of Lebanon by stopping Israeli shipping and by imposing a blockade again on Israeli shipping. But they haven't yet blockaded it completely, that area, the Red Sea. If that happens, then this is a major moment. And it's also not even guaranteed that the Saudi-backed forces can withstand an offensive from Ansar Allah. They could end up succeeding in capturing Aden, at which point now there's a blockade on Saudi Arabia. The Yemenis have taken over their country once again. They've united the historic South and North Yemen, or at least they've united it with Aden, which makes it, in essence, united. There are people that live, further to the east of the country, but, majority of the population is now under one government's control. And so Saudi Arabia could be in an even worse position. And then the real question is, Ansarullah, if the blockade is going to be implemented, if Saudi Arabia is going to start conducting more airstrikes and it's going to be killing civilians in Sana'a and other areas, then Ansarullah has even better missile capabilities now than it did in 2022. Now, it can hit Israel with ease, right? But Saudi Arabia, targets in Saudi Arabia, a lot easier for it to hit with its drones and with its ballistic and cruise missiles. So it will apply pressure there on the Saudi economy that will be choked from two different angles. So it will be choked from the Red Sea, choked from the Persian Gulf, and now it's getting hit with missile attacks. It's not a good look. And Ansarullah won't relent. You know, Iran was a little bit more strategic with its attacks. Ansarullah, if it needs be, and civilian massacres are caused, they will, because they're being directly attacked by Saudi Arabia, they will hit key infrastructure, energy infrastructure, you know, the power grid, stuff like this. They will go after things like this. So will Saudi Arabia even try and make a stand if a major offensive happens? Because it looks like we're at the very start of that now. I think there's a good chance that Saudi Arabia might try and make a deal with Ansarullah instead of doing that, unless the United States pushes them in another direction, because it's in their interests to make a deal with Yemen and to unite the country at this point. And the reason I say it's in their interests is because they don't have any other options. In the same way, it was in the interests of the Trump administration to put forth this MOU, because it takes a little bit of tension off of them, right, with Iran, right? Now, it's not a favorable deal. It's not a victory for the United States, but it is the best they could extract at that current moment, which is why they did it. And they may still break it. But at this point, the Saudis have to look at that and understand what is possibly going to come their way. Now, what's going to be interesting about this is if Yemen is actually liberated and gets access to its resources and is able to trade, then we have now the first Arab country that will be a properly revolutionary government that supports Palestine 100% of the way, that will become way more rich, obviously, than it is now, because it's been made a very, very poor country. And it will build power and influence. And of course, Yemen here, united with Iran, now this is a massive win to Iran's axis of resistance. They now have a state which has control over another strait in the vicinity, in their neighborhood, which is a massive win for them. Now, we'll get into the Lebanon question in a minute, but if we cross over to Lebanon here, there's currently evidently a conspiracy that's being hatched with Lebanon. And so what we're seeing now is that the Israelis have escalated their bombardment, especially today. They drone struck a car in Nabatea in South Lebanon and killed 4 people, all of them civilians, of course. I think a mother, her daughter, and 2 workers were killed in the airstrike. And of course, the Lebanese government that signed the agreement to recognize Israel, one of the clauses in its normalizing agreement, which sold out the country, wasn't only that they legitimized an Israeli occupation of South Lebanon, but what they did is they had a clause that they would not pursue legal action against Israel. So Israel violates the ceasefire, kills a bunch of civilians in South Lebanon, and Lebanon, the government of Lebanon, in a decision that was not voted on by the parliament, not approved by the cabinet, right? This is not democratic at all. This is just a bunch of puppets that were installed. They were the US picks, right? Because of the political situation that emerged, and I've covered this in other episodes, that have unilaterally decided by themselves to recognize Israel and then sign an agreement saying that they cannot appeal through international legal mechanisms, through international courts, against the Israelis for their war crimes. So basically, Israel gets off scot-free for everything. They can't even legally appeal. So they legitimize the occupation of the south of their country, and they state they themselves are going to go against Hezbollah. They're going to fight against Lebanese Hezbollah, and they're going to try and destroy them and their weapons, a task that Israel itself couldn't do. So the Lebanese army, which is smaller in size than Hezbollah, is less capable, less well-trained, is a glorified police force, let's be honest, is going to do the work that Israel couldn't do. No, obviously what's going to happen is if they try to go against Hezbollah, Hezbollah will beat them very easily. I'm not going to say it's not going to be bloody and there won't be, a lot of unnecessary death and destruction. Maybe, well, of course there will be, unfortunately. But that's the whole point. Drag the country to a civil war with these puppets, Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, use them, the US puppets, in order to drag the country to civil war. And then Hezbollah is going to have to fight them. Now, there's another element to this, which I want people to be aware of. We're hearing reports that thousands of US troops could be deployed to Beirut. Now, this is a major development if this actually happens, because initially some of those reports were claiming that these US service members would be there to train the Lebanese forces and help advise them when they are going after Hezbollah's weapons. But if a civil war breaks out, that they could be on standby to perform defensive maneuvers. What could really end up happening if a civil war actually breaks out is that the US could end up trying to secure Beirut. So if US troops are deployed into Beirut, this is a terrible scenario. This is, again, a foreign occupation by the United States and a foreign occupation by the Israelis in the south. And then right now, and within the clauses of the agreement, the Lebanese government has agreed to allow Arab and regional international partners to aid it in its quest to disarm Hezbollah, while Israel continues to occupy the south of Lebanon and massacre civilians on a near daily basis. But that's fine, right? Hezbollah, which is defending the country, which is the only group that's defending the country, because the army is not allowed to. They're literally not allowed to. Even when Israel assassinates commanders in the Lebanese army, assassinates its soldiers, strikes checkpoints where Lebanese army soldiers are and kills them, strikes funerals, right, where they're carrying the dead, they don't care, right? The Lebanese government orders them to stand down and run away. That's what they do. They don't defend. They're not an army. They're a security force. That's it. Because they only deal internally with domestic affairs. An army is supposed to defend, from outside threats. That's the whole point of the army, right? It's normally what we mean when we say an army. Normally, they're going to defend your borders. They're going to do things outside of your country. But in terms of what we see them do is they act like a police force. They go and beat protesters with batons on the streets of Beirut. That's what the Lebanese army does, because they're not allowed to do anything else. The rank and file, if they get the orders to fight Israel, they would, because they got the orders before to try and fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda when they were trying to come over the border into Lebanon. And by the way, if it wasn't for Hezbollah, that situation would have turned out very different, because Hezbollah fought side by side with the Lebanese army to repel ISIS coming into Lebanon. That's what actually happened in the country. But anyway, getting to the point, if US troops are placed in, and because we've seen these mobilizations from Abu Muhammad al-Jolani or Ahmed al-Shara, whichever you want to refer to him as, the current sitting president of Syria, because of his actions, there is a buildup, which we showed before, which continues along the border area, specifically the Beqa in Syria. These here, the ABCD regions, these are the ones highlighted. And we know because some people have pointed out and said, well, these are, anti-Syrian government propagandists, right? at this point. Still, we're hearing people get called Assadists, when I don't think there are that many people. That it's sort of like people who supported Saddam Hussein. I'm sure there are loyalists, still, but there still are loyalists to Saddam Hussein. But at the end of the day, there's no massive money behind it, right? But let's assume that you're going to, say that is an Assadist propaganda. Well, we've seen Syrian television report on it. So what do you do with that? Favorable local Syrian TV report on these mobilizations. And there's a lot of support internally for this sort of mission amongst supporters of the government in Damascus for attacking Lebanon. There is support. Now, it's not the majority of the Syrian people, but there's support from these gangs and tribal groups for doing it. And these are the people who will be doing the fighting. So these are the people that matter in this equation, right? So you could potentially have the US attempting to occupy Beirut. You could have the Syrians coming into the Bekaa. These are the current threats that are facing Lebanon. And then you have the Israelis that are stuck in their positions in South Lebanon that they took months and months to get to. And they made a big stink about how they took these areas when Hezbollah was just strategically withdrawing and dragging them deeper and deeper into their territory, because that's the whole point. This is asymmetric warfare. They want to drag them in. They want to monitor them, right? And that leads to these ambushes, which are still ongoing. Like Hezbollah right now are not publicly announcing their operations. They've been quite silent about their operations. But there are these reports that keep popping up where the Israelis, this is an interesting title for everyone in terms of Israeli propaganda, and I'm trying to cope. IDF shells Hezbollah sites after soldier hurt in clash with gunmen in South Lebanon, right? So they're claiming here that their soldier was hurt, right? This is the word they use in their headline. And then you just start reading the article. An IDF soldier was severely wounded in a clash with a Hezbollah gunman. So that's just a taste of their propaganda and their cope about what's happening. And these cases have happened frequently. We've seen that Hezbollah are actually responding to Israeli ceasefire violations by doing things like detonating IEDs on Israeli convoys. Now, the Israelis and the Israeli settler media will start reporting on these instances, and we'll talk about a security incident and the severity of it. And then, of course, there's a censor, the military censor comes in, and we don't hear any follow-up on, the alleged 4 or 5 casualties that happen each of these times that this occurs. But we're not hearing announcements of these operations from Hezbollah. And a similar thing occurred right after the US-Iran ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire, which was signed between Iran and the United States. Not the current MOU, but the first ceasefire, where Hezbollah held their fire. They didn't make any statements about daily operations resisting the Israelis. They resisted attempts to advance if they tried to, the Israelis. They have and they're doing the same now. They resist attempts of the Israelis to advance further into Lebanon, but they're not openly announcing it. But what we had during that period of about a week or so, I believe, was that Hezbollah were detonating IEDs on Israeli convoys, and there were all of these Israeli soldiers dying, and all of these reports of these mass casualty events amongst Israeli soldiers. And Hezbollah was not actually publicly announcing them. But what they were doing is their men who are still in South Lebanon, who are there, and their job is their spotters to watch the Israeli military in the south of Lebanon. They were monitoring the Israeli movements, and they were planting IEDs, detonating them. And I believe it was like 5 or 6 IEDs detonated tanks and armored personnel carriers and inflicted dozens of casualties before Hezbollah started adopting, right, these attacks that it was doing. So we're in a similar period now where Hezbollah are not outwardly claiming every single retaliatory operation. Now, they have dramatically reduced their rate of fire. And I would say a reason for that, and this is me speculating now, but a reason for that may be because in the coming phase, if they suspect, and it's not confirmed that Syria will invade Lebanon, but if they suspect that the Syrians will invade the Bekaa and the Lebanese army will be ordered to open fire on their forces, they may have to conduct certain defensive maneuvers in the Bekaa and also, as well, a security operation in order to combat the attempt to attack them and disarm them from the the US proxies in Lebanon, let's just call them that at that point. Once that's ordered, it's just a US proxy project. It's a US plan that was implemented. And by the way, last August 2025, there was a US plan presented. Tom Barak came over, the ambassador. At the time, he was supposed to be the ambassador to Turkey and some envoy to Syria, special envoy to Syria, but then he just took over the Lebanon file. He presented a plan that was put together by the US military to disarm Hezbollah to the Lebanese government, which adopted it and considered Hezbollah a banned organization inside their country. Again, this is something that they've been planning for a long time. The US has put together proposals. They want to create this civil war situation. And the purpose here is not that, the guys that the US, this is something that we have to understand about US regime change projects. It's never about installing the opposition. It's never about that. For example, in Iraq, it was not about installing one leader or movement that opposed Saddam Hussein. It wasn't about that. It was about destroying the country and making and neutralizing the potential threat from that country. That was the purpose. Controlling, destroying it, neutralizing the threat, and then controlling it. Right? And it did that through corrupt officials. Right? That's the way, and sowing sectarian violence in the region. So the whole purpose of this project, like in Syria, they couldn't give a damn about whether it was Abu Muhammad al-Julani or it was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi that controlled Damascus. They could not care. In fact, they would not care. They would have accepted Bashar al-Assad if Bashar did one thing, kicked Iran out. That was the US proposal. The US proposal constantly to Bashar al-Assad was kick Iran out of your country, stop supplying sending weapons to Hezbollah, and we will leave you alone. We can lift the sanctions, we can do a deal, and all of the stuff that you've seen happen with Jolani, that can happen. And they would have done it because, again, the US doesn't have any moral bone in its body when it comes to the US regime. Neither do the Israelis, neither do the French. Macron, he's now in Damascus, sitting down real cool with his sunglasses, right? The real reason Macron right now, because he is in he is in Damascus meeting with Shara. The real reason he has these glasses on is probably just to hide the bruises that he's getting from his wife, the beating that he's getting from his wife. This is probably the reason why he has those glasses on, because I don't know why he's sporting them around so cool. Look at me. And then he's telling the Syrians, your priority is to stop weapons going into Lebanon. It's like, shut up. Like, nobody cares what you think. Like, obviously, Jolani does, because unfortunately for him, he's in a difficult situation. He knows invading neighboring Lebanon will bring on a catastrophe for him and his forces and might bring on an Iraqi invasion and the end of his rule. But at the same time, he's completely dependent upon his Western allies who were his backers and sustainers. And at the end of the day, the one that calls the shots is the United States in Syria. That's just the reality on the ground. So the whole purpose of this project here in Lebanon, this is a long sort of way of explaining this. The whole purpose of it is to cripple the country. That's why they're doing what they're doing. They want to cripple Lebanon, cripple Lebanese society. They want to have a situation where there is a blockade imposed on Lebanon, where every single bank is sanctioned, where they starve it economically, sort of like Yemen. Because in Yemen, it wasn't just about winning. It was about making the Yemeni people suffer to the point where they capitulate, they accept. And if they don't capitulate and they don't accept, then we just punish them until sometime that maybe they do. That's the whole purpose here. Corrupt, destroy the country, take away its power, take away its economic depth, creates sectarian civil wars inside the country. And the same would have been for Iran if they succeeded, and they didn't in Iran. The same thing. Create the sectarian fighting and all of the rest of it. And the sectarianism, by the way, because a lot of people go, oh, there's Muslim and Christian. I'm going to pull up this map here actually for a second. So another thing before I get into this is the Israelis, they created in their agreement with Lebanon, the Lebanese government, 2 deconfliction experimental zones. As you can see, they're outside of the yellow line, which is where Israel currently occupies in South Lebanon. So these deconfliction zones aren't even areas, except one of them partially, where Israel would have to withdraw. So Israel refused to even withdraw from this tiny little territory in their agreement. They refused to even respect that part of the agreement that they signed, just so that everyone is completely aware here. But in terms of all of the sectarian violence that we hear about, and a lot of people like to talk about this and talk about the region and, well, you know, the Christians, how many Christians are living here, and the Sunni and the Shia and all of this. The reality is all of this stuff is an invention of the United States and the Israelis in the region, in terms of in the modern context, and really only started after the overthrow of the Iraqi government. Now you'll hear people in the Arab world that talk about Saddam Hussein as a Sunni leader and Yasser Arafat as a Sunni leader. These people were secular. These were not Sunni leaders, right? There's nothing Sunni about them in terms of their religion, right? Because we hear about Sunni and Shia. The only reason they started churning this crap up is because they overthrew the government in Iraq, and it was a plot inside of Iraq. And then after that, as well, with Iran, the Iranians, they had huge influence. They were financing all of the resistance groups to Israel, whether you like those organizations or hate them based upon whatever. The reality is Hezbollah was formed as a resistance to Israel, continues to resist Israel, is the only force in that region that has the power to properly resist Israel, and is supportive of the Palestinian cause. That's just the reality. And anyone else telling you anything else is lying to you. I don't care what you think about them, about their religious views, whatever, as a political party inside of Lebanon. People can have problems and all of this about their doctrine, whatever. They are a resistance group that is resisting Israeli occupation. And on that point, that is the reason why Israel opposes them. They don't care about anything else in their politics, but they want to brainwash the Western world and the Muslim and Arab world into believing in this Sunni Shia divide, which in reality is just all churned up and nonsense, because it wasn't actually something that existed, again, prior to interventionism in the region. Now, where did all of this sort of start? And the likes of the government, which now rules Damascus, of Jelani, with the Salafi mindset, where did this come from? Well, it's from the 1700s, and there was a guy called Hamad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he created what's known as Wahhabism, or now today we refer to these people as Wahhabis, right? They don't like that title, but that's who they follow. They follow somebody, that's his name, Hamad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he wrote a book, or he is behind a book called Kitab al-Tawheed, which is the book of monotheism. And really, this guy is sort of the, let's say, the spiritual guide and the justification for Saudi Arabia, or back then, Saud, the Saudi, what would become the royal family, the Saudis, to expand from their area, in like the Najd region of what is now Saudi Arabia into neighboring areas and to fight wars against other Muslims and kill other Muslims. They did go into Iraq and they killed Shia in Iraq as well. That is part of the history. Later on, the Saudis, again, with using Wahhabism, would do something called takfir. They would, in essence, deem the Ottomans as non-Muslims because of certain beliefs, which I won't get into now, and which would justify allying with the British, right, in order to fight against them, right? So you ally with Christians because they're the people of the book. And sort of what happened here is they perform these mental gymnastics in order to justify grabbing power and killing people. Like that is what it is, really, in a nutshell. I'm making this very, very simplistic here, but this is really where this ideology came from. And after that, in the Arab and Muslim world, when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, the majority of the Arab world didn't think about the Iranians as Shia. They saw them as Muslims and really people that managed to overthrow a US-backed dictator. And then really the Iranian Revolution and Khomeini became a big name with the hostage crisis. This was something that really got the attention of the Arab world. But the whole Shia thing was never a part of it back then. Now it's a big thing because if you look at these Gulf states, the ideology that they promote and the people that they pay to talk about the Islamic faith adhere to this Wahhabi ideology. And again, the Wahhabi ideology enables you to nitpick at things at other Muslims, whether they're Sunni, and in this case, Shia, the majority Shia here. So you can go to other Muslims and say, you're not actually a real Muslim, and I can ally with Israel because they're Jewish, and Jewish people are in Islam, the people of the book, as are Christians. So you can form an alliance with them because it's mental gymnastics. That's what it is. And all pushed by the United States and rulers in the Arab world that simply are out for power. And a lot of people, again, don't know this, but that whole thing about the Sunni Shia divide, that's what it is. Other than that, there are theological differences, for sure. Irreconcilable theological differences. But we're never causing massive wars like this for the reason of Sunni Shia, just for the sake of Sunni Shia. There are different madhabs within, or schools of thought within Sunni Islam that differ on different things, where, again, if you use the Wahhabi ideology, you can deem them a non-Muslim and you can kill them. I'm going into all of this because some people asked about the divide, and people were actually commenting before about the Sunni Shia divide. And it is something important to keep in mind, because when you hear people making like these arguments about this massive battle between Sunni and Shia, it's not actually the way that it is presented. So now you will see in Iran, all sorts of things get thrown in the Arab world. They have channels running in Arabic round the clock talking about how the Shia are fire worshippers, which they get from like Zoroastrianism, I guess, right? Not Shia, right? They don't worship fire. And just anything, just to talk bad about the Iranians and Shia in general. And the whole entire purpose here, the whole purpose of all of this sectarian nonsense is because Iran, which happens to be a majority Shia country, is funding resistance to Israel. That's it. That's it. The whole reason. If Iran had a different Shia leadership that came in tomorrow and capitulated to the United States and normalized ties with Israel, they wouldn't say a word about them. These people don't have a problem with Azerbaijan, which has a great relation with Israel, which supplies, I think, 70% of their cheap energy that they get. Azerbaijan. They never talk they're not talking about the Shia in Azerbaijan. We never hear about that. It's the Shia where? In Iran, in Iraq, and in Lebanon, primarily. And they'll extend that to to Yemen as well. And then they'll make up all of this nonsense. And they'll make up entire narratives about how many people were killed in a genocide of Sunni and this and that. And they take real atrocities and real battles and real crimes and animosity that happen during different conflicts, and then they twist them in order to build this stupid narrative which exists today, which gives the argument of Sunni and Shia, which gets to the point where there are people in the Arab world, and you will hear them talk, and they'll talk about Sunni leaders, and they will list Saddam Hussein and Yasser Arafat, the former head of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Iraqi president, who were not Muslim leaders. They weren't like Islamic leaders. You know, that was just their description, right? They were born that. That's what by default they are, I guess. But they didn't rule as Sunnis. But again, they want to push this nonsense to divide people. Not to say there isn't differences. And everything I've just covered is a very brief summary of all of this. But somebody did ask about this divide. And we hear all of these, quite frankly, stupid Western commentators speak about Sunni and Shia, not actually understanding anything about it. And as a result, most people unfortunately don't know, just like they don't know anything about what is happening in Yemen, right? And Yemen, you know, their school of thought when it comes to Islam, even though they're technically deemed as Shia, are not exactly the same as the 12er Shia in Iran. But again, like at the end of the day, the whole point with this sectarianism is to distract and to divide. They want to destroy countries, they want to divide populations, and they hated the fact that formerly Syria was not a country plagued by sectarianism before the war. It just wasn't. Now, were there sectarian-minded people? Yes, of course there was. And were there projects ongoing, especially in rural areas, which were funded by the Gulf states to push a sectarian agenda? Yes. And did things that the government do exacerbate this? Yes. But in general, the people in Syria were not super sectarian. Neither were the people in Iraq either. But they push this on them, and then when the war happens and people are fighting and dying over all of this stuff, then it's done. You know, it's hard to go back from all of that. So that's sort of to address that point. Another thing that I wanted to address, because many people were requesting that I cover this. This is from. We'll look at this article first, which covers it. So Hamas announced that they are dissolving the governing body in Gaza, right, ahead of a power transfer. They say on NBC News. This sort of shocked people. The Israelis reacted to this by saying, "Don't believe Hamas will relinquish power in Gaza," Palestinians tell Post. And then the Jerusalem Post. And you know what? I actually believe that it probably is actually a senior Palestinian official in the Palestinian Authority, because they're at this point, you know, they're just a subcontractor, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank for the occupation. But they say Hamas hasn't declared an end to its role in the Gaza Strip, right? So I'm assuming that they are citing a Palestinian Authority official who's complaining about it. Now, what we had to understand about this is a lot of people started sort of freaking out about this and asking the question, well, is Hamas giving up? Are we going to see the end of Hamas in the Gaza Strip? And no, the short answer is no. Not because they're lying about giving control over of the governing body of Gaza. They have a committee that was set up to govern Gaza, and they've dissolved that committee. For a long time, you know, the Israelis are lying about this, and then the corporate media are also lying about it, and I'll break this down. For a very long time, Hamas has wanted to relinquish control of the civil administration in the Gaza Strip. They've wanted to focus outside of that and on resistance. And maybe in, civil society, they have their projects, charitable organizations. That, Hamas as an organization was the reason really for or its precursor, the Mujama, were the reason for the Islamic University in Gaza. They had a whole Islamic civil society sector, which outperformed, all the alternatives. So Hamas obviously has a societal influence, and it's a movement, an Islamic movement, but it's also, of course, a armed resistance movement. That is Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, which is what Hamas means, right? So the whole purpose of them really is they wanted to go back to just being a resistance force. In the year 2017, Hamas tried to give up power to the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah. They wanted to allow the Palestinian Authority to come and take over the civil administration of the Gaza Strip. They signed an agreement. I believe they deployed Palestinian Authority forces on the Gaza border at Rafah. And there was a big celebration across Gaza. Everyone was so happy about this. And the whole purpose of Hamas wanting to do this was they wanted the sanctions, which had been in place on Gaza since 2006, when they won the legislative elections in a landslide, and then reinforced, and the siege reinforced in 2007 after Hamas defeated a coup plot, which was organized through the then head of the Palestinian Authority Preventative Security Forces, so they're like intelligence wing, Hamid Dahlan, who's now sort of the head of intelligence in the United Arab Emirates, perhaps a story for another day. The United States, the Bush administration funded, a coup to occur to take over Gaza, and that coup plot was to be headed by Mohammed Dahlan. That failed because the Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, thwarted it, created this what's known as the Palestinian Civil War, and then that divided the two territories. But Hamas, after winning, they won. They were shocked. They didn't have experience in governing before this. And now suddenly there's a coup plot to take them out. They've defeated this coup plot. Israel's imposed this medieval siege. There's sanctions. They're trying to talk to the United States, talk to the Europeans, but they've put sanctions on them. And they wanted to, for a long time, they wanted to try and get a solution to this. A solution that would still allow them to keep their weapons, right? Because they will never agree to give up their weapons. But they wanted to hand the civil administration over because they'd rather the Palestinian Authority, quite frankly, or a technocratic body would manage that stuff. Right now, especially because of the conditions that are faced by the people in Gaza, there's sewage running through the streets, there's garbage everywhere. The Israelis don't allow the bare necessities in. They don't allow reconstruction goods in. They don't allow sanitary, equipment and goods. The hospitals don't function, nothing functions. They can't even get new tents to live in. That's the situation of Gaza. And so handing over control of Gaza to a body that will run the civil administration, that is supposed to be a technocratic government, in theory, this is a good thing that Hamas would want, and all the Palestinian factions would want. And they recently met, by the way, and had this multi-faction gathering where they agreed upon a national consensus going forward. So this is something that's been in the works. But, a lot of people have posted this story and said, oh, Hamas are giving up. That's not what's happening. Hamas want the civil administration to be run. They handle resistance. Now, some people will go, well, Israel's not going to accept that. That's why they're opposed to it. That's why they're saying that Hamas is lying. Because the Israelis, if this happens, then they've got no excuse to let stuff in. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to pivot, and they're going to have to say, but Hamas didn't disarm, which in the ceasefire agreement, they never agreed to disarmament. Never once agreed to disarmament. But again, Israel's going to LARP on about this point, like it did in Lebanon, right? And pull this up again, these two experimental zones in red here, right? One of which is completely in Lebanese controlled territory and not in territory that Israel has entered. And they still wouldn't implement this plan. Because again, they want to expand that yellow line like they've done the Gaza Strip. They wanted to, originally it was 54% they were supposed to have of Gaza, and then they were supposed to withdraw their forces completely by phase 2 of the agreement. Instead, they took over 60%, now 70%, and they want to go even further into the Gaza Strip, right? Because they just cannot keep an agreement at all. So they will focus and they will pivot on Hamas and disarming Hamas, like they were saying about Hezbollah and disarming Hezbollah. And if they don't allow goods to come into the Gaza Strip, then Hamas are trying to take measures and take steps in good faith to relieve tension and to also see if they can try and extract anything, try and get some goods into the Gaza Strip for the population. And quite frankly, if you look at the record of Hamas, they are an organization that wanted to hand over control of Gaza, but they want to keep their weapons. They want to make sure that they don't become like the West Bank, where Israel can just take over, put its standing army there, have the Europeans pay the bills for their illegal occupation, and then have a collaborator force that arrests and kills its own people if they dare to stand up to the fact that Israel is raiding their villages, taking their kids, abducting them in the middle of the night, torturing them, treating them like garbage, less than animals, less than insects, setting up checkpoints everywhere, demolishing their homes, arbitrary demolitions of villages, the settlers coming in and stealing their stuff. Anyone that knows about the West Bank, they didn't want that to happen in Gaza. So they don't want the Palestinian Authority security forces to take over Gaza, because if they do that and Hamas is disarmed, then Gaza becomes like the West Bank, and the Israelis will slowly just colonize the place anyway. They'll put all their settler colonialists inside their settlements again. They'll expand, and we're back to phase 1, right? Prior to Oslo, right? We're going to be in a state where the Palestinian Authority is so incredibly corrupt. It has no power, no leverage. There's no weapons. There's no resistance. Hamas won't accept that, and all of the other Palestinian factions won't accept that. So Hamas wants the civil administration run by someone else, but we're going to keep our arms. And again, Israel's not going to accept that. So now we're in this situation where Israel will try to sabotage this, sabotage the fact that Hamas is actually doing what everyone said that they should do since the start. And they've wanted to do this for a very long time. And the record is very clear on this. If Hamas could have given up control, it would have done so. But it had to keep its weapons because it wants to defend its population, which makes sense. And again, this is not about what you think of the political ideology, the social, the social understandings that are communicated and policies that are communicated domestically by Hamas, what they think, right? Just as you can disagree with Hezbollah and things, the reality is none of that matters in this conversation. We can talk about that until, the cows come home, right? And there's a lot of intricacies and things that you could get into there, but none of that stuff matters at the end of the day. What matters is they're resisting Israeli occupation. So if there was a Jolani that they could implant in Gaza to take over the Gaza Strip, Israel would be fine with that. That's the reality. And in fact, they're using these people. We were talking about sectarianism a minute ago. They were using these people, these Salafist-minded people, and they continue to use them in order to fight against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Just to drag it back to that conversation again when it comes to religion and all of the rest of this, because people have a big problem with Hamas running the Gaza Strip because they're an Islamic group. People don't know that Hamas has a long history of fighting Al-Qaeda, killing all of these offshoot groups of Al-Qaeda, cracking down on them quite brutally, actually, and coming for all the Salafist groups, the Daesh group that tried to launch inside of the ISIS group that tried to launch inside of Gaza. They cracked down on them and they killed them. And, they tried to spread across from the Sinai and they cracked down on it. But right now, the Israelis and the UAE is, of course, involved in backing these forces, created 5 gangs, ISIS-affiliated gangs, in order to attack Hamas. But, to sort of conclude this point here, this is not the end of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. This is simply them trying to take a step towards getting phase 2 of the agreement implemented. Israel will do its very best to, or very worst, to destroy any progress in Gaza and bettering the living conditions of the civilian population of Gaza. And that's what we're going to see, unfortunately, going forward. But Hamas is not dissolving itself. It's not, as a movement, it's not giving up its weapons. It's not retreating. And ultimately, if Israel keep pushing, I've said this time and time again, but it will mean that there will eventually be a response that will come, which will be a huge response. It won't be a limited one. So that's something that, again, I've been asked to cover here. If you are currently in the stream, might be interesting. We didn't actually play this footage from earlier. This is more aerial footage from the funeral of Khamenei in Tehran. This is even before, I believe, the funeral event started. This is how many people in the capital city. And of course, this is a slap in the face to the Western corporate media, who again tell us that all of the whole population of Iran hates the leader and was happy that he died, when the reality is there's some diaspora Iranians that believe that for sure. We've all seen them, and we've seen them come and cheer for bombing their grandparents, and come out in the street and chant Javid Shah, and talk about how they're the real Aryans and they're against the Arab invaders and all of the rest of it, right? Those people, they exist, but the Iranians in Iran, like the vast majority of the people who live there, even the ones that many of them who do actually oppose the government and its policies, right, the way it's run, there are many people there that do, of course, but they're not irrational like these people. They don't want the country to get bombed. And many people as well, of course, very much loyal to Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. So, and they're now loyal to Mujtaba, his son, who's taken over. And this is, a big blow to Western corporate media, which only shows us the diaspora Iranians, or like the odd Shah supporter that they can find in Tehran somewhere, who they can get on tape going, "Oh, I'm so sad that, there's a pro-government, a pro-regime demonstration, and I want my home to be bombed. And please, Mr. Netanyahu, kill my parents. It would free Iran and turn us back into an Aryan country that would be Zoroastrian again, even though we don't actually know anything about Zoroastrianism, but that's fine. Kill my parents, bomb my country." Right? That's what's presented on the BBC, which said that what you saw there was just thousands of people. They continue to push that narrative, by the way. Thousands. It's only thousands in Iran. Thousands. That's it. Not even tens of thousands. Thousands of people, apparently. Right? I think you could spot thousands in different, like, small segments of this crowd. But again, like, the reason I'm showing this is because it smacks the corporate media's propaganda in the face. And it's beautiful to see. And we have to, take the opportunity here to laugh at corporate media and their fairy tale nonsense about Iran. Because, the people that they have covering Iran are either professional propagandists who do probably know something about Iran, but are lying, or people that don't know anything. Quite frankly, they're just stupid. They're not educated on the topic. They don't know anything. They know talking points. And like the politicians that get their talking points from their AIPAC handlers, go out there and say all this stuff, the evil Iranian regime and the mullahs and blah, blah. No depth at all. No understanding of how people react when you bomb their neighbors, not a good look. And that's the point. They want us to believe that Iran is so foreign, that Yemen is so foreign, that Lebanon is such a weird situation. And maybe we sort of care about the Christians, but yeah, whatever. And they want to make it seem so far away and distant and foreign to you that you accept different standards. The reality is there's an awful lot of people in Western countries, in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in France, Germany, the UK that hate their government with burning passion. And anytime you talk to these people about the current leader of their country, they will not be able to get through a few sentences without cussing, right? And effing and blinding about their hatred of their government. But then ask that person whether, would you be cool with like Russia or China like bombing your neighbors and assassinating your president, like in order to overthrow the government of your country and then creating a civil war between different sects of your own society? Evidently, the answer would be no. So, the corporate media wants us to have completely different standards for foreign countries and peoples. And this is part of the dehumanization process here, that we just completely dehumanize populations overseas so that we can justify nonsense solutions that don't make any sense. So that's ultimately what they're trying to do. So again, we have to, where necessary, play this footage, wave it around in their face, because whatever view you have on Iran, this just stands as a testament to the fact that they are liars and they're crashing out right now because they don't know what to do about this, because the evidence is there in their face and they've got to try and downplay it, deny it, and put a spin, but they can't, because it sort of does look like millions of people in the street mourning, doesn't it? Not any sort of way that you can get out of that. So they are having a, maybe we should, say a prayer for them. They've got hard days coming. It's been a difficult time to be a corporate media journalist. Really have to reach for the stars for your explanations in this one. But if you have got this far, everybody, and we actually do have a clip, a compilation of footage from Lebanon that we'll look at in a moment before we end the stream. But for everyone that is watching, if you've got this far, please do hit that like button. Please share this video, subscribe, follow us. And we are looking for 300 new members for this live show to keep it alive. So you can join Mint Press on Patreon or right here on YouTube, join our membership. And for those who have been joining, we do greatly thank you because you're the reason why this show can continue to be on the air, and we can run through all of these events and the context and provide this to everyone, so everyone's aware. So this is some footage, a compilation of different FPV drone attacks that Hezbollah carried out on Israeli tanks. You see that one right there. That was a tank kill hit. It's probably the best video we have of the FPV drone hitting a tank, because there's a second angle filming the aftermath. But this is these videos are released by Hezbollah, the compilations now, even though they're not announcing new attacks. They are, of course, repelling Israeli advances, and occasionally we're seeing some clashes with them and that they're inflicting casualties on the Israelis. But these videos are there for psychological warfare, because, it's, again, when there's video footage of it, a little hard to deny what's been done. And there's a lot of footage, particularly for these first-person view drones, which have taken out countless Israeli military vehicles, air defense systems. You're seeing there, they're taking out trucks and medevac missions, even striking the soldiers directly, and then dropping anti-personnel munitions. And this has caused such chaos for the Israelis that they have had to conspire in order to use the puppets in Beirut to try and create a civil war in Lebanon so that they don't have to endure this all day, every day. But the reality is, eventually this is going to restart, and they are going to have to endure this every day as they did previously. They're not going to get around it. So that was some of the footage that we have there. Meanwhile, another development that we have is that the Israeli settlers, we've been talking about Syria a little bit, the Israeli settlers decided to take it upon themselves to go up to Qanaitra in southern Syria. And these settlers want to set up an outpost inside of Syrian territory because, and I am not even kidding, God gave them Syria too. Yeah. Who could have guessed God gave them Syria? So that's their explanation, and they want to go there, and they want to, because in some of their own words, they've been talking about this online, probably, not knowing that we have a translate button, because, these are not very educated people. They're sort of very low IQ people. So, they talk in Hebrew and they think, oh, they can't understand Hebrew. It's like, we have translating tools. And so they've been talking about how the wheat harvests in the Qanaitra countryside, that they can do way better when they take over Qanaitra in southern Syria. Meanwhile, there's been a Syrian Islamic resistance, like a secretary general of that group, who's made an announcement. It does look like there are resistance forces that are building up in southern Syria. I suspect it will take them some time to start actually operating because they don't want to do anything to provoke a massive Israeli campaign and then just get, badly, impacted and damaged by whatever Israel will do in their incursions. And also, of course, when they start fighting Israel, Israel massacres Syrian civilians, and they don't want that. That's not a good idea. So, and people would probably end up blaming them if they did that and they weren't properly prepared. So, and of course, Jolani or Sharat, he, with the ferries, I guess, he's not, actually in control of anything here. So when I'm referring to him, the United States government in Damascus is not going to do anything about this. Occasionally it issues some condemnations of Israel. Oh, Israel really shouldn't do that. We'll complain to the United Nations, and Syria reserves the right to retaliate through legal mechanisms. Right? Which is funny because these people were the same people like, oh, Bashar al-Assad, he was saying that he was doing the same thing. It's like, well, at least Bashar actually submitted, the complaint to the United Nations, the useless complaints to the United Nations, right? At least like his, UN representative actually submitted it. I haven't seen actually any proper submissions yet. But it might be to come, might be in the books, might get shocked by Damascus submitting, the revolutionaries in Damascus submitting a complaint that Israel has killed more civilians. I mean, Israel bombed the defense ministry building. It's took over, I think, like 6 different sites, like aquifers and water sites in the south of Syria. Taking over agricultural lands, setting up checkpoints, everything. Not a single bullet from the government-affiliated forces fired towards them. The closest they got was when they did a parade late last year, celebrating the fall of the previous government, where they paraded in front of the Israeli occupying forces at a checkpoint. And it's like, huh? What is happening here? But there are, of course, people in southern Syria who are not like them, and they're not controlled by those forces that are US-backed forces in Damascus. And it might end up shaping up to be a scenario inside of Syria that sort of resembles what happened in Lebanon with the resistance to Israeli occupation. Now, Israel is going to try to desperately ensure that does not happen, but that might end up being what happens eventually in Syria. So with that being said, everyone on here right now, if you are here and you did make it this far, definitely please do hit that like button. Also, put your comments in the comment section below. It does help with the algorithm. And also, if you have any questions that you need answered as well, perhaps that we can address them in upcoming streams here because, there's lots of people that sort of get confused about different subjects, or just maybe they want an opinion on it, right? So maybe they just want to see what another point of view is. So we will continue to monitor everything. We're going to be here, same place, same time on Thursday. Any footage that comes out from the battlefield, we're going to have it right here on this stream. We're going to be covering everything as it comes in, any escalation, and we're going to ensure that we do everything to get all of that information out to you, the viewers. And so thank you to everyone for being in here today. And we will see you on Thursday, same time, same place. Till next time.